All right, gang, welcome to week 2 of our study of the spiritual gifts. Excited to get back into 1 Corinthians 12 with you. We left off at verse 11 last week, so we are going to jump right into verse 12 today because we got a lot of ground to cover. Here's what it says. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. Now this is an incredibly helpful simile that the Apostle Paul has employed to help us understand both the spiritual gifts as well as the nature of the church. So he's saying your body, singular, has many parts, plural. Similarly, Christ's body, the church, singular, has many members, many parts, plural. So all Christians are members of Christ's body, meaning that they, like the members of the body, exist to perform certain functions. You can see that the members of my body are doing all sorts of things to help achieve the aim that I'm after, that being effective communication. And so it's not just verbal, it's also body language. My hands go all over the place, my eyes do different things, my facial expression changes, all serving a singular purpose, right? And so many parts, one body working together to accomplish a common goal. Very helpful simile and metaphor that gets employed by the Apostle Paul. But this also tells us that we can't separate the gifts from the church, right? Just like you can't separate the members from the body, because the members exist for the body. The individual parts exist to make up the whole. And so the spiritual gifts are given for what purpose? Well, we learned that in verse 7 of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, didn't we? They're given for the common good. Now, at this point, it may be helpful to understand that this is one of the reasons that it's unacceptable for Christians not to give themselves to Christ's body, and by that I mean a local expression of Christ's body, namely a local church. Because Christ called you and He saved you and He gifted you for what purpose? For the purpose of you contributing your spiritual gift for the common good of a local congregation, of a local body. So if you're a Christian, this may be hard-hitting, but we'll say it anyway. If you're a Christian, it's not a matter of whether or not you are a member of the body. It's just a member of whether or not you're dead weight. But you are a part of the body. It's just a question of whether or not you are doing as a member of the body what you ought to be doing, or if you're a leg that we're just kind of carrying along and is attached but not particularly helpful. All right, let's look now at verse 13. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. Now, I stated this in the first session, but the Corinthians had a preoccupation with the miraculous gifts, those earth, wind, water, fire type gifts. They wanted the healing, they wanted the tongues, they wanted the prophecy. Those were the gifts that they'd really honed in on and assigned a great deal of importance to. We'll in fact see later in these chapters that they had a particular infatuation with the gift of tongues. Now, this kind of zeroing in on a certain subset of gifts apparently led the Corinthians to make faulty assumptions about what was and was not a valid spiritual gift. They thought, well, if I can't speak in tongues or heal anyone, then I'm not particularly useful. In fact, maybe I'm not even a part of the body at all. And so you can see why he says what he says, right? Because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body. right? That they may have seen the pedestal upon which these miraculous gifts were seated and said, I don't have one of those miraculous gifts, and that seems to be all my church is identifying as spiritual giftedness. So if I don't have one of those, I must not even be part of the body. So if this particular church values eyes and you're an ear, then as an ear, you may be thinking, I'm not even a part of this body. Like, they don't even acknowledge me as being useful, right? And so that's the idea. Now, this teaches us that what a church values and celebrates is incredibly important, because what we value and celebrate will either be helping people to embrace or to spurn their spiritual gift on the basis of whether or not we assign value and honor and usefulness to those gifts. Now, I think Paul gives us an excellent example of honoring all of these gifts and all of these contributions for the common good in his epistles, because he's constantly honoring people by name and stating their contributions. Because he wants to make sure that people know that it's not just preachers and tongue speakers and healers who should be honored and recognized, because he's always calling out people who host churches in their homes, and those who visit those people who are imprisoned for their faith, and those who support his ministry financially. He wants to say, look, all of these are valid and spirit-empowered and useful and good. All right, verse 17. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them, as He chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. This is simply the Apostle Paul saying, don't discount God's design. Just like He made all of the parts of your body to work in concert together in order to be able to perform the right functions and do the things that you need it to do, so He crafted all of the spiritual gifts and then assigned them to different members of the church in order to make it so that the church could perform all of the functions that she needs to perform. He's saying effectively God's design is good, which means that your spiritual gifts are good because God makes no mistakes in His design. Verse 21 says, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. And our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. And if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Now, Paul begins here to talk about the danger of assigning value to people on the basis of our understanding of the value of their gifts. Can you see the shift there? He says in verse 25 that there be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. You can see that he's shifted from talking specifically about the gifts to talking specifically about the members, that being the individuals who possess the gifts. Because you don't care for spiritual gifts, right? You care for people. So Paul is concerned that those who have the highly sought after and most prized gifts within the Corinthian congregation will receive disproportionate attention and care. And he says that this ought not be the case. So we don't assign differing values to people on the basis of the gifts that we value, prize, or are most attracted to. Right, so that's the idea there. Now, verse 27. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, and then gifts of healing, helping, administrating, and various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. Now, this is interesting because right after he just asserted that each gift is valuable because it comes from God, and each person is valuable regardless of the gift that he or she possesses, he then goes on to make value judgments about the gifts themselves. Did you hear that? He says to earnestly seek the higher gifts. That's hierarchical language. That's value language. That's the language of appraisal. You see, and if that wasn't enough, he says that after he has just said that God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, and then goes down the list. And as best I understand it, the first, second, third, he's ranking them to some degree or another in terms of their significance or in terms of their potency, the power that they have to shape and assist and catalyze the church. So it's saying that these kinds of gifts are in fact of unique importance and significance in terms of driving the body forward to do that which the body is intended to do. So he's acknowledging a hierarchy of significance or potency within the gifts. But that ought not to scare us, because it doesn't mean that those with less potent gifts are less valuable, because he's already asserted that we ought to value and celebrate those gifts and that we ought to call those things out so that people don't spurn their gifts. Because while one part of the body may be stronger, more potent, have more of a driving effect in the body, it does not nullify the weaker or less potent aspects or members of the body. So there is, I think, an analogy to this in Peter's first epistle when he deals with marriage. Because you'll notice that we're talking about making sure that we are honoring these gifts that are not, to use Paul's language, the higher gifts. So what's the importance of honoring these gifts that are not the higher gifts within the church? And that's where we get to the analogy in 1 Peter. This is specifically verse 7 of chapter 3, where Peter tells men, husbands, to honor their wives, quote, as the weaker vessel. Now, why would it be important for a husband to honor his wife specifically as the weaker vessel? Well, it seems pretty clear that the reason to honor her is precisely because she's the weaker vessel. Perhaps this is because in antiquity women were not highly regarded, so the honor that she would receive may just come from her husband, not the larger society. That if the society was unwilling to attribute that value, was unwilling to acknowledge that value, was unwilling to celebrate that value, then she would certainly find that value assigned to her, find that honor given to her by her Christian husband, who has been taught by the Lord to see value where the world does not see value. And I think that would be true even in our own day, because a woman who is what Scripture calls her to be, quiet, submissive, gentle in spirit, a keeper of her home, she will certainly not be honored by our secular society that would tell that woman that she is effectively a backwards bimbo who is brainlessly submitting to a Bronze Age book and needs to liberate herself from the chains of her religion and go make something of herself rather than being at home submitting to her husband, right? You can see that she's not going to be honored for inhabiting the space that God has told her to inhabit and obeying the commands that God has told her to command, which makes it all the more important that she be honored for her obedience to God by her husband, because she'll not receive that honor from anyone else, perhaps. Right, so similarly, these less public gifts, less showy gifts, less overtly and obviously valuable gifts must be seen and celebrated by the church body so that their worth is made plain to the people who possess them, in the same way that the husband must honor the wife as the weaker vessel, so that her value and worth is communicated to her loudly, clearly, and consistently. So let's make sure that we do not spurn or ignore or marginalize those gifts that do not display themselves quite as publicly as some of the other gifts, lest we make those who do not have those public gifts feel as if they are in fact not a part of the body. At this point, as always, we'll have some discussion around those themes, and I pray that the Lord blesses that time.